Good evening and welcome to Aware on the Air for the 11th week of 2015. Our program is presented by members and friends of Aware, a local peace group. Aware is an acronym for Anti-War, Anti-Racism Effort. I'm Carl Estabrook. Aware was established 13 years ago after the attacks of 9/11-2001 by citizens of Champaign-Urbana who realized that the U.S. government would use those crimes to justify its already long-standing attempts to exercise military control over the Middle East. Middle East gas and oil are needed by America's economic competitors in Europe and Asia, and control of them gives the U.S. an advantage over China, Germany, and other countries. Now, after 13 years of war, President Obama, who was elected to end George Bush's wars, is waging war in 8 countries: Afghanistan, Iraq, Syria, Libya, Pakistan, Somalia, Yemen, and even the Philippines. Many Americans are unaware that he's conducting the most extreme terrorist campaign of modern times, a secret series of murders by drone, whereby he's already killed thousands of people, including hundreds of children. That he is bombing ISIS in Iraq and Syria in violation of the United Nations Charter, which forbids, quote, the threat or use of force against the territorial integrity or political independence of any state without the authorization of the UN Security Council, and that he is recklessly provoking war with Russia in Ukraine, where a U.S. proxy government has already killed thousands, to eviscerate the Russian economy and help the American 1% profit from disorder in Eurasia. Also, most Americans don't know that that U.S. Special Forces, death squads like American Sniper, are active in more than 100 countries around the world. Their activities include kidnapping, we call it rendition, torture, and murder. Americans don't know, but the rest of the world does, and we're hated for it. Champaign-Urbana Aware recommends that you contact the President and our representatives in Congress and tell them to stop killing people around the world and to bring all U.S. troops home. The Aware web page and Facebook page have email addresses and phone numbers for President Obama, Senator Dick Durbin, Senator Mark Kirk, and Representative Rodney Davis. 13 years of nonstop U.S. war-making is more than enough. And of course, it didn't begin with 9/11. But the administration that promised hope and change in the war and the economy has dashed hopes and produced no change except to expand the wars. The Obama administration are today committing murder around the world, but pretending that they aren't, in order to mislead the only enemy they really fear, the American people, who drove 2 presidents from office during the Vietnam War. And the government is helped in this deception by a compliant, big business-run media, so Americans know far less about what's going on than citizens of other countries do. Tonight, we'll try to give a better account with commentaries by a number of people on the panel, and we'll begin with Ron Zook with Springtime for Bibi.
Yes, well, I'm referring indirectly to the speech that Prime Minister of Israel, Netanyahu, gave to the House last week, and what's subsequently being said about it. In the local daily, there was a piece headlined, Obama versus Bibi. It says that diplomacy is in short supply in the relationship between President Barack Obama and Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Bibi Netanyahu. The line is that there's intense personal hostility between them. And you always have to wonder, how does this writer know this? Can they read minds and the emotions and feelings of other people? Apparently they can. So President Obama deeply resents House Speaker John Boehner's invitation to Netanyahu, whom the president personally despises. Again, you have to ask, how does he know this? But, well, of course he doesn't. But anyway, I see the hand of our Mr. D in this. But anyway, Obama's tough talk about Iran is another example of his idle threats. News reports indicate that the U.S. is preparing to acquiesce to Iran having a nuclear program that would require little time to convert to nuclear weapons. So here's the WD, weapons of mass destruction, WMD line again. And after all of the public fell for it once, they may do so again. So this has been turned into then a matter of conflict of personalities, as if there are no real objective conflicts involved in this. And it's a matter of Obama disliking Netanyahu and the feeling apparently being mutual. So there's little said about the real causes of the apparent conflict here. This is viewed as a addition to Mr. Netanyahu's campaign, political campaign in Israel, where it appears that he could be in some danger of being replaced this time by a more center-left candidate. Although that election, I believe it's next week, we'll have to see how that comes out. So there is a certain flavor of nationalism, nativism arising in Israel. They will not like anyone talking about it. But I see that there's a whole spectrum of things which is going on in Israel and in a number of countries around the world, in Europe, variously called tribalism, nationalism, patriotism, nativism, and even by some fascism. It's always around. It's surfacing in a number of places. We might mention France with Marie Le Pen. French for the French is their motto. In Russia, it's the same thing, Russia for the Russians. And in Sweden, there's a element there trying to blame the recent supposed rash of rapes on immigrants, and they're blaming the Social Democratic Workers' Party for that, who are bringing in all of these foreigners and then trying to put them on welfare and get their votes. In Japan, Spain, India, Italy, a movement of resentment against the North African immigrants who are coming there. And of course, we have Norway 4 or 5 years ago. The Oslo massacre seems to have been motivated by the same kind of xenophobia. And of course, we have it going on in here in the USA as well, and all of the agitation against illegal immigrants, as they're called. So I see this as a rising force pretty much everywhere. If you go to YouTube and look for nativism, patriotism elements, there's a really scary one about Greece and the rise of the Golden Dawn there. They are not shy about parading around with their swastikas, their banners and armbands, and they are, due to the reduced state of the Greek people, providing free food for a lot of the poor Greeks. And the Greeks, a few of them are saying, look, Golden Dawn is the only one actually doing anything for us, and we'll probably vote for them in the future. So this is very troubling to me and so on, but we have to think about how far this will go. The ethnic cleansing that's being advocated in some quarters, and I'll come back to that if anyone else wants to take up the theme.
Thank you, Ron. You're watching Aware on the Air. We'll go to David Johnson.
Okay, thank you, Carl. Yes, it's been an interesting week in a lot of things. Barack Obama several weeks ago announced that his Justice Department will not be pursuing any type of federal hate crime charges against George Zimmerman, the murderer of unarmed teenager Trayvon Martin, nor will they be pursuing any kind of hate crime charges against Ferguson police officer Darren Wilson for the murder of unarmed Michael Brown. That was last week, and then Saturday, Obama runs off to Selma, Alabama to get a photo op walking across the Edmund Pettus Bridge arm in arm with past President George W. Bush. And then Monday declares that Venezuela is a security threat to the interests of the United States government. Amazing. Anyway, what I want to talk about today is this whole thing about declaring Venezuela a security threat to the United States. First of all, we need to put this in context. Since February of 2014, continuing violent protests against the elected government of President Nicolas Maduro have claimed more than 40 lives in Venezuela and injured more than 800 people. Most were victims of opposition supporters who have also set fire to universities, public buildings, and bus stations. Much of the unrest has taken place in richer neighborhoods, led by students attending private schools. The demonstrations have been carried out by right-wing political parties opposed to the Maduro government's progressive program. And backing these parties and several of the non-government organizations organizing the protests is the United States government, which has been trying to overthrow the Venezuelan government since 2002, the year former President Hugo Chavez, now deceased, was briefly removed in a CIA-orchestrated military coup. Since the election of Hugo Chavez in 1998, there has been significant redistribution of wealth from the rich to the poor majority in Venezuela, bringing them free medical care and education, as well as subsidized food and housing, land reform, and grassroots participatory democracy in the forms of communal councils. Chavez was also the most prominent leader of the Latin American so-called revolution, which integrated and united many Latin American countries economically and politically and substantially weakened U.S. corporate influence in the region. The idea was to develop an entirely new continental economy, one that does not function according to corporate market rules, but rather responds to the development needs of the Latin American people. Such domestic and regional policies have incurred the wrath of our corporate-controlled politicians in Washington, D.C., and the Venezuelan elite, which has lost 18 out of 19 elections since the very popular Hugo Chavez was first elected to office. The Venezuelan electoral process under Chavez and Maduro has been called the best in the world by ex-President, U.S. President Jimmy Carter, after observing several presidential elections. After Chavez's death in 2013, Nicolas Maduro, his chosen successor, continues to win elections, compelling the opposition to resort once again to widespread violence to try to overthrow the government. At stake for the U.S. is control of Venezuela's enormous oil and mineral wealth. The country is estimated to have the world's largest oil reserves. President Maduro calls the protests the revolt of the rich. Asked by a Guardian UK news reporter in April whether his government should accept responsibility for some of the killings, he proposed that 95% of the protest-related deaths were the fault of the right-wing extremist groups. Maduro mentioned 3 motorcyclists who were beheaded by a wire strung across the road by protesters. In the same exclusive Guardian interview, Maduro, a former bus driver and union leader, emphasized the considerable increases in social services and reduction in inequality over the last 15 years in Venezuela. When I was a union leader, there wasn't a single program to protect the education, health, housing, and salaries of workers, he said. It was the reign of savage capitalism. Today in Venezuela, the working class is in power. It's the country where the rich protest and the poor celebrate their social well-being. Now Venezuela is facing an unconventional war that the U.S. has perfected over the last decades in a string of coups spanning from Brazil in the 1960s to Chile in 1973 and more recently in Honduras in 2008. Maduro told The Guardian that Venezuela's opposition aims at paralyzing the main cities of the country, badly copying what happened in Kiev, the Ukraine, where the main roads to the cities were blocked off until they made governability impossible, which led to the overthrow of the elected government of Ukraine. They try to increase economic problems through an economic war to cut the supplies of basic goods and boost an artificial inflation to create social discontent and violence, to betray a country in flames, which could lead them to justify international isolation and even foreign intervention, he said, just like what was done in Chile in the 1970s. Such tactics mirror those used by the CIA not only in Chile against the elected government of Salvador Allende. At the time, U.S. President Richard Nixon specifically instructed the CIA to, quote, make the Chilean economy scream. When this was not enough to unseat Allende, the Chilean military was bribed to orchestrate a military coup. This option is not open to the U.S. currently in Venezuela, where the military showed its loyalty in 2002 by returning President Hugo Chavez to power. Washington, D.C. is reduced now to funding an ineffectual and violent political opposition that can neither win elections nor sustain large-scale demonstrations. Anti-government protests in Venezuela that seek regime change have been led by several individuals and organizations with close ties to the U.S. government. For instance, Leopoldo Lopez and Maria Corina Machado, two of the public leaders behind the violent protests, have long histories as collaborators, grantees, and agents of the CIA and the U.S. State Department. The National Endowment for Democracy and the U.S. Agency for International Development have channeled multi-million-dollar funding to Lopez's political parties. The National Endowment for Democracy is a foundation created by the U.S. Congress in 1983 to essentially do the CIA's covert work for them. The National Endowment for Democracy has been one of the principal financiers of destabilization in Venezuela and other countries in Latin America and around the world. The National Endowment for Democracy and U.S. Agency for International Development have given more than $14 million to opposition groups in Venezuela just in the last year, including funding for campaigns in 2013 and 2014 and the current protests. Since 2001, the U.S. government has given anti-Chavez and anti-Maduro groups more than $100 million of U.S. taxpayer money to undermine and overthrow both progressive governments, including financing the 2002 coup. Between 2013 and 14, National Endowment Democracy funds were also given to private corporate-owned Venezuelan media groups that run the campaign to discredit the government of Venezuela, and throughout the past year, an unprecedented media war has been waged against the Venezuelan government. The media war has been fanned by Western corporate media, which has rebroadcast images from Twitter that were actually from Egypt and Syria, while trying to claim that they came from Venezuela. What are portrayed as peaceful protests have all the hallmarks of an anti-democratic rebellion, shot through with class privilege and racism, overwhelmingly upper middle class and confined to wealthy white areas. The protests have now shrunk to fire bombings and ritual fights with the police. And anyway, it is the Venezuelan oligarchs and the corporate-controlled government of the United States and Canada that have turned their backs on democracy when they try to claim that it's the Venezuelan government that's anti-democratic. If there's any threat to the security interests of the United States, it is not the current Venezuelan government, but instead the corporate special interests who currently control our government here in the United States.
Thank you, David. You're listening to Aware on the Air. You're watching Aware on the Air. And when we've gone through the panel, we'll have a chance for some comments. I have a question for David about Venezuela, but we'll postpone that to the end, and we'll come back to some of the points that have been made so far. Next, we'll go to Michael Bay with some comments.
Yeah, I'd firstly present some news about the German stance on the Ukraine conflict, which is twofold at the moment. They on the one hand, decline to deliver weapons to support the Russian rebels against invading Russian troops, or to essentially resolve the war with force. But on the other hand, the German Foreign Minister Steinmeier welcomes an increased influence of the Organization for Security and Collaboration in Europe in this conflict, and Merkel increasingly aggressively intervenes together with President Hollande in the conflict in Ukraine. Last week we heard about, we talked about the article from John Pilger about fascism and the increasing development of a police state in the United States. The fascism and the development of a police state is not only due to our stance about wars in the world, but also about espionage that we are experiencing here in our country. The government and the NSA has built a vast network of fusion centers throughout the country, which allow to collect information about any people in the environment and aggregate that to create a profile of each individual, which will be used to potentially protect us against terrorism, but also to identify any unlawful acts that any person has done. In the past, not only terrorists have been identified, but also peace protesters like the ACLU have been put on a map of potential terrorists for, in this case, informing public schools about religious freedom. Other opponents of these policies, like the providers of encrypted emails, LavaBit and Silent Circle, have been shut down after heavy US governmental pressure. They, quote, said that they preferred to shut down their businesses than to violate the privacy rights of their over 400,000 email users.
Yeah.
Espionage does not only remain a duty of the government and the state, but is also privatized. We have an organization which acts secretly and is called SmartGuard and collaborates with the NSA, providing them, these are representatives in companies like Google, like Facebook, like in banks, throughout industry, and they are collecting information about any new developments and delivering them to the NSA. But not only that, they also have the freedom to, or the allowance to shoot to kill in the event of martial law. So considering that we've been in war for the past 15 years or even longer, it's probably considerable when such an incident might occur and when a member of SmartGuard might make use of his supreme allowance to kill. There's one member of the Senate, Senator Rand Paul, who calls the acts of the NSA an outrageous abuse of its power, and says that it's a violation of the Fourth Amendment. The Senate, however, didn't fail to file a reform against the supreme power of the NSA, and as it turned out last November, it is being spied itself by the CIA. The spies themselves, however, weren't prosecuted and released because an accountancy board declared their movements as necessary for the maintenance of self-defense. That's all that I have about the German stance about the Ukraine and the espionage in the United States. If we don't do anything against that, our privacy will increasingly vanish, and probably everybody will appear mute, will appear totally visible to our government, and we'll see where that goes.
Thank you very much, Michael. You're listening to Aware on the Air. We'll go to Karen Aram. And are we pivoting to Asia, Karen?
No, well, I could mention one little thing here. I'm sure there's a lot I could mention, but a couple weeks ago, I think it was February 19th approximately, In Sri Lanka, the newly elected president, prime minister, made a trip to India to meet with their prime minister, primarily to assure them of their willingness to be friendlier and to be friendlier with the U.S., and that they're going to, shall we say, limit their association with China. Those are not the exact words, but that's clearly what the intention was. And this was immediately after meetings with our government took place. So we see this happening more and more throughout Asia, especially when it's somebody that we had been highly supportive of getting elected. I want to just do a few quotes here today. One quotation that came up recently was from Noam Chomsky, and he was referring to Adam Smith and David Cardoza in the past, who both had hoped that home bias, or what I would call patriotism, would influence financiers, and that they would be content with their profits. And when you read that, and you realize that this is just so anathema to everything today. Financiers are never content with their profits today, are they? The 1%. They don't care who they crush to continue increasing their profits. Another comment I heard just this morning from the son of Martin Luther King. He was saying that this is in celebration of Selma, and he said that, Martin, he wouldn't want to be idolized, and we idolize him on his holiday and on these various different days of remembrance. We bring out and we celebrate. He said he wouldn't want to be idolized. What he would want was to have his ideals be embraced.
Yeah.
So I quite like that. I have a couple more here in order to be a little more inspiring. Sometimes it gets depressing when we see, they always talk about 1 step forward and 2 steps back. Well, I think what we often see, especially given Obama's speech and Netanyahu's speech recently, we feel more like it's like 1 step forward and then 3 or 4 steps back. But Immanuel Kant's dictum is that if justice perishes, human life on earth has lost its meaning. And then we have Socrates, who said, "It is better to suffer wrong than to do wrong." And as Hannah Arendt points out, the only morally reliable people are not those who just say, "This is wrong," but also those who say, "This should not be done." But most of all, those who say, "I can't," or "I will not." She says the greatest evildoers are those who don't remember because they have never given a thought to the matter, and without remembrance, nothing can hold them back. For human beings, thinking of past matters means moving in the dimension of depth, striking roots, and thus stabilizing ourselves, so as not to be swept away by whatever may occur, the Zeitgeist or history or simple temptation. The greatest evil is not radical, it has no roots. And because it has no roots, it has no limitations. It can go to unthinkable extremes and sweep over the whole world. And I think that's a lot of what we talk about, and some of what David was referring to, going back to the invasion of Chile by the U.S., and it was an invasion by us. We were behind it. And looking at what's happening today, I think that it is important to know our history and to understand the past in order to understand the present. And I think that's a lot of what people here are always attempting to do.
Thank you, Karen. Karen?
On that note, remembering the past, and I want to read a poem by Naomi Shihab Nye, which also goes along with Ron's talk about nativism, tribalism, patriotism, fascism, all that stuff. The name of the poem is Statue of Liberty Dreams of Emma Lazarus Awakens with Tears on Her Cheeks. So if you remember, the Statue of Liberty has inscripted on it, "Give me your tired, your poor, your huddled masses yearning to be free, to breathe free, the wretched refuge of your teeming shore. Send these, the homeless, the tempest-tossed me. I lift my lamp beside the golden door." So this is the poem that Naomi Shihab Nye has written. Give me your tired, your poor, but not too tired and not too poor. And we will give them the red tape, the long line, white bread in its wrapper, forms to fill out, and the looks, the stares that say you are not where or what you should be. Not quite, not yet. You will never live up to us. Your huddled masses yearning to be free can keep huddling, even here. Sorry to say this, neighborhoods with poor drainage, potholes, stunning gunshots. You'll team here too. You dreamed a kinder place, a tree no one would cut, a cabinet to store your clothes, simple jobs bringing payment on time, someone to stand up for you, the way I used to do for everyone, holding my torch to get you to your new home in this new country, stitched of immigrants from the get-go. But you would always be homesick. No one said that. I was the doorkeeper, concierge, welcome chief, but rules have changed and I'm the bouncer at a big club. Had no say in it. Hear me? Any chance I could be, again, the one I used to be? I lift my lamp beside the golden door. It's still up high. At night, I tuck it into my robe and worry what will happen to you. Every taunt, every turnaround, hand it over. That's not what you came here for. I'll fold it into my rubbing rag, bring back a shine. So that's her poem. And it's actually also talking about knowing our history. I was looking for some stuff on Selma and ran across this book in the library called Denied, Detained, and Deported. And it's a it's done by the National Geographic. It's an interesting book. It's really thin. And I mentioned that because a friend of mine is going to start teaching her grandchildren some history and was looking for some good history books to help them remember the history. And Denied, Detained, and Deported is about immigrants. And it's just some short stories about individual people. For instance, when the United States turned away the St. Louis, the ship St. Louis from Germany that was bringing over 900 and some Jewish immigrants that were kicked out of, well, Germany, the first thing that they did was the Nazis, they kicked out, they wanted to get rid of the Jews. And so this was before they started doing the incarcerating them, but they would actually try to get rid of them, try to get them out of the country. And so a ship offered to bring the Jews to Cuba. And then, and on the ship, they were treated like royalty because the captain, his whole reason for doing it was because he felt that they were being, their rights had been taken away from them, and he wanted to make them feel human. And this was just at the beginning, like right after the Kristallnacht. And so they were turned away in Cuba because the Cuba had just changed its immigration laws while the ship was actually going over the ocean. And so then they were turned away in Cuba, they were turned away in the United States because the United States said that, well, Roosevelt was up for election and he didn't want to lose. And so he was turned away the ship was turned away by Canada, and so it had to return to Europe. So it went to France, to France via the United States. So it came from Germany and then returned to France. And anyway, it's a really interesting story, but that's only one of the stories. It also talks about how we interred all the Japanese related people, except for the ones that were servants and workers in Hawaii. We didn't inter all those people, but we did all the other. And this is a really important stories that we forget about really quickly, and very well told. And it's a really short. You could easily get a high school student to read the stories and understand a lot more about how we have treated immigrants over the years. It doesn't even talk about, say, like the Irish or the Chinese or what we did to the Native Americans at all. But this is a great way to start talking about history, and we should all remember what the United States has done or failed to do over and over and over and over again. We criticize other countries for what they do to their immigrants, but we should take very careful stock of what we have done.
Thank you very much, Karen. You're watching Aware on the Air. We have a few minutes left now to go around the panel and ask some questions about the things that you've heard already this evening. And since I started, I get to start again. Now I want to ask David about these questions of Venezuela that he raised. The question here seems always to me, for us particularly, to be a question of United States policy. And David has sketched how the U.S. is once again interfering with the political process in Venezuela. Interfering is far too weak a word here, but I'd like him to draw a parallel with what the U.S. is doing elsewhere, most notably in Ukraine, and what seems to be the amazing willingness of the U.S. government, and by that I mean the Obama administration, this liberal administration, to employ fascists, to use the most extreme methods to overthrow governments that the U.S. finds unbiddable. That is, governments that won't do what they're told by the United States, like Venezuela and the former Ukraine. The U.S. has been remarkably successful in this regard. But I'll let David talk about what parallels he sees between Ukraine and Venezuela.
Oh, there's I mean, it's the same. It's the same purpose and very similar tactics. I think the reason, it seems like Hugo Chavez, when he was elected in 1998, and then once they saw that he was actually the real thing, actually going to do something for the majority of the Venezuelan peoples, when they started considering him an enemy, when they tried to overthrow him they had a coup in 2002 that lasted about 48 hours, but the majority of the military revolted against it and reinstalled Hugo Chavez, the elected president, to power. And anyway, I think what happened is that for the longest time, since 2002, the United States government has been a little preoccupied in the Middle East. And more recently, in addition to the Middle East, there have gotten more preoccupations in Africa and in particular the Ukraine. I think the reason Chavez was so successful for so many years was that they were preoccupied, and also because he was such a popular figure, a very charismatic figure, not just in Venezuela, but all throughout Latin America, and was able to form quite a few Latin American organizations, including ALBA, the Economic Common Market, Petrocaribe, which was a sort of a petrol bank of sorts, an oil bank, to basically where certain countries could get petroleum at reduced rates, and also the Organization of South American Nations, which most Latin American countries are members of now, and have recently condemned the actions of the United States. By the way, it's amazing. I didn't make it on CNN, isn't it?
Yeah.
I think what it is that Maduro, the new president of Venezuela, is not as charismatic as Hugo Chavez. So I think the corporate interests that control our government in Washington, D.C. see an opportunity to try to get Venezuela back. And if they could if they could get control of Venezuela back, it would be a real blow to the rest of Latin America.
What about the suggestion that the problem in Venezuela is that they didn't take socialism far enough? That neither Chavez nor Maduro have been able to build a popular base for what they're doing because of the necessity of dealing with essentially world capital, but world capital is represented by the United States. They haven't built up the independent enterprises. This is not a new story. Some people say that's what happened in Chile in '73 too. The unwillingness or the inability to build a base that really was counter enough to the American interests to defend the revolutionary moves they'd already made.
Well, I think regionally, Chavez has done an excellent job because before, each country was pitted against the other. Now there's quite a bit of unity in Latin America. Now, my big criticism of Chavez and the Venezuelan government since 1998 is that they didn't diversify the economy enough. They talked about it, but they didn't really, and they did a little bit, especially in agriculture, but not enough, in my opinion. They're still too overly dependent on oil as a resource. And to me, that's their biggest fault.
And that's allowed the U.S. to do this remarkable manipulation of oil price, which, I mean, we talk about what the Saudis are doing and so forth, but this is American policy for the last 6 months that has seriously damaged major American opponents, Venezuela and Russia, top of the list. Ron, you questions or comments?
Yes, Karen 1 and Karen 2, you talked about history and remembrance and so on, and nativism. History is always a conflicted area, and it's very much subject to political distortion and so on. And do we really get anything from history that's undisputable, that is a solid lesson about the past? Many historians have claimed not. And it's a delicate subject. In Oklahoma, for example, they are trying to remove advanced placement history from the schools because it's not telling a patriotic enough story. It has too many negative points about the USA in it.
Yes,
They
and
take it
look what
seriously.
look what just happened in Oklahoma. Okay,
yeah.
at the university there.
Right.
Obviously,
Yep.
they have a lot. I
You were
think.
talking about
Well,
the racist incident?
Yes,
Well,
at the
I'm not sure
university
there's a direct
recently.
causal relationship.
Well,
but-
I think it is. I
Okay.
think it is. When you have a state or a government
just
or
saying
a
those
group. Yeah.
Oklahoma students need this, right?
Yeah, they need better history for one thing.
Yeah.
No, my thinking on the history is that those of us who are questioning what our government is doing, because we're looking at history and we're looking at the parallels to what is happening today. And I think all of the people that we listen to, and like Howard Zinn has written a book on history that we certainly didn't get when we were in school. And I think this is the kind of history, when I refer to a need to understand history, it does, of course, it's like the media. You can't trust any one source of media, so you really have to research. And I think it's the same with history. I think that we can't just come out of elementary or high school, or even the survey courses I took in college certainly didn't address the issues that I'm reading about and learning about now. And that's why a simple example is what David was referring to when discussing Venezuela. He refers back to Chile and what happened in Chile in '73. Yeah. So I think to most people today, '73, that was history. It was in my time, but it's history. And I think knowing that and knowing the truth, which is out there now, it's well known, it's documented. So yeah, you can't just take it verbatim from a history book that is assigned to us. We have to really look into it. And
I'm going to go further
like,
on that.
yeah,
Before Ron
exactly.
asks his next question. Yes, I think that we need to have history classes, but we also need to read multiple texts, not just the ones that are written by the publishers that publish it for Texas.
Right.
So I think that history needs to be read not just from the textbooks, but also by people from different perspectives. And one of the best history lessons, I actually hated history class in high school, and I'll mention why. Because my instructor was quite bad. He kept telling us to take out the noisy students out behind the school and beat them up. He was
The American way.
yeah, it was, and he had fought during World War II, and anyway, so yeah, he was very military, and so that turned it off for me for a long time until I went into the Peace Corps, and I think also getting the history from another perspective, just being entrenched in it. If you leave the United States and go to a developing country, you will see a completely different understanding of what the United States is doing in the world. And to actually even just feel it and hear it from someone else's perspective changes you entirely, and or makes you interested in it for the first time. So I think we need multiple texts. We need to read it from different perspectives, but also we need to understand it from a different. You can physically stay in the United States maybe, but you actually have to hear the voice from someone who experienced the United States actions elsewhere, and because there's no way, we are so isolated here in the United States that it really needs to be understood from the perspective of someone else. Yeah.
Shouldn't we be turning over a new leaf, opening a new chapter, and not looking back on all that bad old stuff, and looking forward to the future?
You're looking ahead, not backwards.
Yes,
as,
yes,
as
right.
Obama
Well,
says, right?
Again, you look at balance. I mean, if somebody's head is only in the past and they're not looking at the present, yeah, then that's an issue.
Some of the reparations that they made to the people that they detained, the Japanese heritage people that they detained during World War II, they eventually, I think it was like not, most of the people that they actually detained were dead by the time that they actually made reparations. They paid them like $20,000. And that is nothing compared to what they actually, all the things that they lost, their homes, their houses, their homes, their jobs. I mean, they were gone for, oh my gosh. And they suffered a lot. There was no running water. It was really horrible. And then they were paid $20,000. I don't think that the reparations met what they incurred, the suffering that they paid. But I do believe in reparations. I do believe that, someone to say, hey, we made a mistake, we are very sorry, is huge. We do need to remember the past, and we do need to seek out some form of justice, or to understand less justice the way that we see justice, and more of a true understanding of what actually happened is really vital. And to forget all that is to, I don't know what, it's...
Who is the we in all that?
Who is the we?
We as a people?
Yeah, the people who let it happen.
They're all dead and gone.
Yeah, but we're also letting it happen again today. And that's the reason, yeah. I'm sorry, go ahead.
Did you all see this survey this last week where we were asked, we the people, were asked what our most trusted source for news and current affairs was in the U.S.? And you know who came out on top?
Fox News.
Yes.
Fox News.
Well, you
Did
see,
that surprise
that's
you, Ron?
part of the problem, yes.
Well,
You know
in
the
a
problem.
sense, yes and no.
And people who consider themselves broad-minded and liberal, they would probably say, oh no, CNN. So, that's our problem.
It's like a choice between Jeb Bush and Hillary, right?
There you go,
Right?
exactly.
Isn't that the way of the, I call it the Iron Curtain of the U.S. corporate media.
Yep.
And I call it the Iron Curtain is because the average American, unless you really make an effort, go
Mm-hmm.
online and look for information, look for the truth. You're not only not going to be informed, you're actually going to be misinformed, intentionally misinformed. And it's difficult to get news information from other countries unless you make a real effort. Now, there's some really bad sources out there that you can get, but I mean, to find really accurate ones, it really requires an effort. And what's interesting, Karen, in regards to history, how when was that, last year when the governor of Indiana wants to. He focused on one single historian. He wanted to ban the books of Howard Zinn in the entire schools and university system in the state of Indiana. I mean, wow, he must be a threat. You know, as that one musical band, the Flobots' famous song, "There's a War Going On for Your Mind," and I think there's nothing better that that shows that is that all the horrible documentaries that are coming out this year, the 50th anniversary of the pullout from Vietnam, I mean, totally taken out of historical context, total propaganda, burying certain facts like that the Gulf of Tonkin actually happened. Well, it didn't. And there's plenty of documentation on this.
So read banned books. That's my answer.
Yeah, we are.
As a
Aren't we
librarian,
always in
read
the
banned books.
position of the six blind men and the elephant? Can we really synthesize what each of them says? Because what each of them says is true, but none of them is the whole truth.
But that doesn't describe,
That's
I
not
think,
necessarily true.
our knowledge of either the past or of current events. It's not that's not the problem. The problem is that the wells are poisoned, eh?
Right.
And when we draw from those wells, what we get is what we have to expect. Like to ask Michael, and I don't mean to put Michael on the spot, but
Yes, you do.
because he's an American.
Yeah.
But in coming to this country, what was your impression of what Americans knew, not only about history, but also about current events? Did you find a difference amongst your American friends from your European friends on what they were aware of and what was going on in the world? Do you think what was the phrase you used a moment ago, David? Were their minds...
A war going on for your mind, yeah.
Yeah, right.
Well,
You may not want to answer that.
no. I can answer that. I can answer
Yeah.
that. So, the difference in the people that surround me in the United States with regard to Germany, especially comes in with their stance to wars and to militarism and to patriotism. In Germany, you will hardly find a person who is proud of his country, who supports any nationalist acts, or who is, because these things make you very likely to be considered as a Nazi. And we have one party in Germany which still supports these thoughts, kind of, but there's been a lot of discussions and movements to forbid this party, and because of our past, Nazism is highly disregarded upon. Whereas in the US, when I had discussions about, for example, the demonstrations in Hong Kong or other countries demonstrating against their governments, I often heard the voice that with these peaceful movements, nothing can really be achieved. So people should take more
Aggressive.
violent acts in order to assert their wills, and this is something that I wouldn't probably not hear in Germany. So
Okay, there you go. My turn? My turn? Can I just?
Yes, your turn.
Yeah, okay.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I didn't get to ask a question.
David, when you were talking about Venezuela, my immediate reaction was, okay, we know the U.S. has been behind a lot of things such as coups, et cetera, proxy, whatever. But when the United States president comes out and refers to a nation as a security threat to the U.S., all I keep thinking is, oh my God, we're going to plan to invade. I mean, that was my immediate reaction. Do you think I'm overreacting, or?
You know, Karen,
really
I
frightening.
asked myself that question when I heard that. I mean, I could not believe, I mean, Obama has sunk into such a low that I would not be surprised by anything he says or does, but that actually shocked me when I heard that Monday. Because I don't know for sure, because frankly, on the one hand, they see an opportunity to take back Venezuela for the corporate interests and basically, at the same time, deal a blow to the rest of Latin America.
Yeah.
On the other hand,
Yeah.
if they invade Venezuela, I think it's going to cause a huge backlash and problem in Latin America. I mean, you got to understand something. Brazil is a huge country. Argentina, fairly sized country, and all the other countries, I mean, the only countries the United States government, as opposed to the United States people, really have control of is Colombia and Peru. And to some extent Panama and Guatemala and El Salvador. So these countries, and Haiti, of course. Haiti keeps going down the memory hole, another country we invaded and basically kicked out a democratically elected president. But I don't know. I mean, it would be quite a significant event. On the other hand, if you'd asked me a year ago if the United States would do what they're currently doing, or 2 years ago, what they're currently doing to Ukraine, I would have said no way. No, they're not. Even they aren't that crazy. But look what happened.
Right,
That's it.
right.
And I agree with you, David, but to call American policy crazy always seems to me to be a problem. In some larger sense, it is if we're talking about things like, say, the survival of humanity.
Exactly.
Then
That's what I'm talking
certainly
about.
American policy is crazy, but it's not the fact that we have crazy people in Washington who are setting means to ends.
I agree.
Rationality, according to Weber, is a process of setting means to ends. Their ends are clear. The ends are the economic domination of the world for the American 1%. Their means are very clever. They've been at it for a long time. They do it well. These are not stupid things if you understand the goal, if you understand what they're trying to do. And the fact of the matter is that our government is also clever enough in convincing the enemy that it does fear, the American people, that it's doing these things for other reasons, for good reasons, for reasons that are protecting us, that are protecting our freedoms, et cetera, et cetera. And it's that lying patina of propaganda that we have to break through, because that's what allows these crazy ends to be pursued by the American government. It is immensely dangerous, certainly, but it's not crazy at the operational level, so to speak.
I agree totally, Carl.
I find one thing kind of interesting about Americans versus other people. I've noticed that more people in the United States are more likely to hear what the government says and to believe it than any other people anywhere.
That's a
Yes.
crucial
And
point.
to believe the media
Right,
too.
right.
I don't see that anywhere else. Everybody
No,
else kind of
right.
doubts everything.
And just ignores it,
The United
right.
States just, for the most part, just take it.
Yeah.
And I'm not sure why, because democracy depends on us not taking it.
Karen, where were you in the Peace Corps? What
I was
country?
in the Dominican Republic, right
Dominican
next to Haiti.
Republic, okay.
Yes.
Final comments, ladies and gentlemen?
I was going to ask Karen if she knows, was Cuba under Batista at the time?
No, it was, I can't remember
Because
who it,
we
it
know-
wasn't Batista, right?
Okay, but was it the same situation? I mean, Batista was our man. He was the U.S. He
I
was in
think
control
it
of
was.
Cuba.
Was
So-
it really?
Because that happened after Kristallnacht, which was 1936, correct?
Yeah.
Okay,
This
Batista
happened in
was in power since
1939.
1932 to
Okay.
33.
Okay, maybe
So
it was then.
so it was tantamount to
An American
Cuba.
colony.
Cuba turning away the ship
Yeah.
was tantamount to the U.S. turning away the
Correct.
ship because they were under our control at the time. Okay, I just wanted to clarify that. And an announcement of our Green Party meetup presentation on
Brew.
Saturday.
President Federico Laredo Brew was the
Did we
Cuban
own
government.
him? Did we own him?
Sure, bought and paid for.
Yeah.
That's all.
Did you
That's my
wanna
point.
include the Green Party announcement, Karen?
I thought maybe you would mention it. David.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Our
Okay, I didn't know
Green
you were
Party- the
talking to
Green
me.
Party
Yes,
presentation on
this Saturday,
Saturday.
March 14th at 1 p.m. at the Champaign Public Library, Room C. Rich Whitney, the past Green Party candidate for governor of Illinois, will be there giving a press conference about his views on solving the budget problem in Illinois, basically a counter alternative proposal to what our current governor, Bruce Rauner, wants to do with the state of Illinois.
You have been watching Aware on the Air, presented by members and friends of Aware, the anti-war, anti-racism effort of Champaign-Urbana, a local peace group, in the 11th week of 2015. Our show is produced and directed by Jason Liggett. Thanks to him, also this program and others like it will be available on YouTube. And see the Facebook page for Aware for articles and poems referred to by the panel. Finally, Aware honors those who reveal the crimes of the U.S. government, which the rest of the world knows about, but Americans don't. Manning, Assange, Snowden, and the rest, who are being persecuted by the Obama administration. This is Carl Estabrook for Ron Zook, Karen Evans-Levy, Stuart Levy, Karen Aram, David Johnson, David Green, Michael Day, and other members and friends of Aware, saying in the words of the late Edward Murrow, good night and good luck.